and you see she's sort of dragging around, and finally she tells you Peter's ill. That's how you find out. It's not on Twitter and Facebook. It's not in social programming. It's standing there with people you love and are loved by. It's watching your little granddaughter Lucy, who loves to go to church because she likes the icons and she gets to light candles and play with the sand they're in, and we go down and have picnics in Sunday school and so forth and so on. But it's watching Stella Andriatakis run over and swoop her up. And no questions asked. Not have you been good? Do you agree? What do you believe? It's knowing that we have a lesbian on our parish council, and according to the official book of orthodoxy, she, quote, shouldn't be there. But she is, because the priest is a wise man, just like my parents were wise. It's knowing that community revolves around genuinely treating people the way you want to be treated. And there's, like I said, this has nothing to do with orthodoxy specifically. There are plenty of Protestant, Roman Catholic, Buddhist, Muslim groups of people who could say the same thing. So I'm not talking about, oh, now come join me, a kind of a this is saved and lost issue here. Just the issue of community and spirituality. And the reason why it's important is because community is where you do the doing of something. Well, where's the glue if it's not theology? And let me just throw a tiny little caveat in here of why theology is such bunk and why it is real nonsense to try to worship a book instead of God, which is what evangelicalism is. It's always the Bible says. Who cares what the Bible says? Who cares what the Bible says? There's only one relevant question when you face God, and that is asking ourselves, who am I? Who am I? What is the content of my character? Has there been an arc between the man that slapped Jessica and the man that Lucy was with the other day who says from the porch outside my kitchen while I'm cooking her lunch, Bob, my napkin's on fire. And Bob, being this, aging, wiser, more tired guy now, he says, I really don't care if the house burns down anyway. It's such a pain to keep up. That's not who I would have been 40 years ago with my little girl of the same age. I would have rushed in and yelled at her and everything, and I just said, oh, really? And I walked in, and there's this nice column of blue-orange flame coming up from this cloth napkin that she's decided to put over the candle. It's a reliability of orthodoxy. The kids really get to light the candles. Now we can't say grace without lighting a candle. So there's always a candle, and she's very mature. I never did anything like this before, so I just go and I take it, and I walk over to the kitchen sink, being very thankful she's not on fire. And I said to her, that wasn't a very good idea, Lucy. And she says, Bah, I will never do that again. So that's Discipline 2011. Discipline 1982 would have been a slap followed by, do you know what you just did? Didn't I already tell you? Blah, blah, blah. It would have been theology, an explanation. What was the result of me doing that with Lucy? It's that she said to me, Bob, my napkin's on fire. She didn't panic and try to put it out and hide this because Bob will be so angry. I must not let him know what I've done. It was the absolute trust of unconditional love. And it's taken me the better part of a lifetime to be able to offer that to anybody. And I certainly don't do it perfectly in any other case, but Lucy's very winsome. So don't you try to set anything on fire. I'll kill you. But that journey does not come from believing you have correct beliefs. It comes from the words, I don't know, or I could be wrong, or I'm sorry. And that's a very different place. That's a very different place to start raising children and having churches and writing books and having relationships and trying to make marriages work. I could be wrong. This is just my opinion. I'm sure I could change my mind. If you say that thing, that's one thing, but if you even touch a few lives around you, like my relationship with Lucy, and you literally live it on that basis, you suddenly find that not only do clouds lift, but you realize the whole idea that salvation, not just in the next life in theology, but in any life now with a grandchild, is not through correct belief. It's through doing those things that actually mold the content of your character, so your natural response is, oh, really, Lucy? Well, here, we'll just take that to the kitchen sink, and that's probably not such a good idea. And she says, well, I'll never do that again. And you can't manufacture that. You actually have to get to that place, because I'm not a patient person. So with me, it doesn't come natural until it does. But correct belief is not the road to that. Correct belief says, if you really look, and I know I'm being facetious, and there's always an out, that's what I hate about theology. It's like, except there's this little thing that gives you a... You have no free will, but it still sort of works out. So we'll still send missionaries, even though God did elect everybody from the beginning. Okay, never mind, just trust us. But in any case, If salvation in this life or the next or any life or today or wherever is through correct belief, then no one can be saved, literally. Because life's not long enough to know anything. And there would not be 25,000 competing seminaries, theologies, and denominations if correct belief was the path to salvation. I grew up in a missionary family back in its fundamentalist incarnation that I talk about at the beginning here of Sex, Mom, and God, where I assume Presbyterians were sort of said, not all Presbyterians, just the ones we had most recently split from, because we had correct theology, and then it sort of came down to Mom, Dad, and me and my sisters at the beginning of L'Abri, because we were the only people sitting in that chalet. I wasn't so sure about my sisters. And Dad treated Mom monstrously, so in the end it was just, well, Mom's probably saved. I think she's saved. And that's facetious, but it narrowed down because it's based on correct belief. As soon as you open the door to the content of your character and behavior, it's no longer individualistic. And it's, by the way, no longer American because it's corporate. Because correct belief isn't the point, it's the content of one's character, not as an isolated creature, but in community. So one of the things I trace in this book is why evangelical Protestants, and I don't mean that in the general, the trouble with talks is it's way too general, but in the book I'm more specific, and I try to be more careful with my terminology, so forgive me the generalizations. But this right-wing brand of evangelical Christianity comes from roots that begin in the Bay State with John Winthrop, that built public houses and churches and so forth, and clinics and hospitals, and you got fined if you didn't come to town meetings, public space. You know, what do you think the commons are? They're the common ground held by everybody. Socialist nirvana, you know, we're all going to have our cows together grazing here. How do we get to a place where you can't even fund Amtrak because that's communist? And it's got to be owned by the Koch brothers, or shares have to be sold, or whatever it may be. Why suddenly do we hate our government? And one of the things that I unpack here is how the social agenda that I helped foster with the pro-life movement became a social agenda that never achieved its social agenda goals, but was used by not just corporate America, but by the Republican Party specifically, and very deliberately, as I know because I talked with both Bush Sr. and Jack Kemp about this at one point. We actually had conversations about building voter bases and so forth when, you know, back in the days when I was in Jerry Falwell's jet. What was the result? And I'll give you a little timeline here that you'll find in the book. I didn't put it as a timeline, but look. Ma and Pa No Name are standing on a corner with a sign that says abortion is murder. We say, we're on your side, and may mean it or not mean it, speaking as a Republican Party. Vote your conscience because we stand for life. The problem is the big bad government, like Reagan said. The government is the problem, not the solution. Ergo, anything that is public is bad because we don't like Roe v. Wade, Doe v. Bolton, gay rights, etc., and the big bad government did that. And so, and it doesn't sound logical, ipso facto, big trajectory forward 30, 40 years, you can't regulate Wall Street because that's the bad government doing stuff. You can't fund Amtrak because it must turn a profit, because the individual must be sacrosanct and not the community. You can't have health care or a single-payer system because that's either communist, socialist, demonic, or whatever. But the real issue is the big bad government's doing it, and aren't they delegitimized? And didn't Francis Schaeffer say we should overthrow them in the Christian Manifesto because they're the wrong view of abortion? And anything, therefore, we're against, including global warming, and damn the science, and all the rest of it. If they're for it, we're against it. And that's great, because it means that the Supreme Court can disallow a class action suit by Walmart women, but allow Walmart to give unlimited anonymous contributions to any candidate of their choice and buy whatever election they feel they need to buy. And that's not hyperbole. That's exactly the political situation we're in. Who sold them the country? My dad, myself, Dr. Koop, pro-life activists, social activists from the right, who said, you can't trust the U.S. government. We must take back America for God. And I got out of the movement because I realized, and I didn't have an epiphany, but 20/20 hindsight makes for good speeches, so I'll pretend I did, that the people I was in bed with, who had literally wrapped themselves in the flag, like we're doing all this for America, actually hate America. In L'Abri in the 60s, we had people in the 70s from the Weather Underground coming through. So I actually knew people in the real New Left, you know, the bomb building New Left, and the left was buying them too then, and still is today in many parts of the world. So it's not a left-right thing. But there's no more radical anti-Americanism than comes out of people like Jim Dobson, focus on the family, all these people who describe America in terms of a country that's now an enemy state, within which there are a few good people like us, the real Americans, as Sarah Palin calls them, and we've got to take this country back. Well, who are they taking it back from? They're taking it back from the few people who still believe in public space, health care, believe in what Lorenzo de Medici believed in when he built the big piazzas in Florence and put great artworks in them instead of just hoarding everything for himself, even though he was a banker. So that goes to show. But then again, they had murdered each other's brothers and so forth, so that's more complicated. But what I'm trying to say is we've come full circle, and that's the last thread I trace in the book, where you have the beginnings of this high, passionate call to moral behavior, and it winds up with a third of the people who voted in New Jersey as Republicans in the last election seriously saying that they don't have a minor quibble with Barack Obama. He's the Antichrist. Oh, well, how do you compromise with that? You know, we're hearing all about reconciliation here. Now, you believe our president is the Antichrist. Okay, what's the midpoint between these two positions? I think he's a pretty good president. No, you know, he's a sign of the apocalypse, and we're going to have a bumper sticker from Psalm 109 calling for his killing, and we're going to sell it everywhere, and then we'll go off with the Michigan militia and train to do something about this, and we'll have a Second Amendment solution. No, it's the halfway point between that. He's just a demon. He's not actually the Antichrist. So, of course, I'm being ridiculous, but you understand that the result of that is all very funny until you see the full scope of this. And I was impacted again with it last week. You can run, but you can't hide. I got a call from Newsweek and the Daily Beast that owned them now the other day saying to me, we're doing this article on Michelle Bachmann, and we interviewed her and say, how did you get into politics? And she says, because I read Francis Schaeffer's book, How Should We Done That and What Are the Human Race? And so, you know, after I finished stabbing myself with a pencil a couple of times, I tried to answer their questions and change the spelling of my name yet again. Read it out. No, is it like young Frankenstein? Schaeffer, Schaeffer, vaguely related. Not Frankie with the Y. I.E. Francesco. This is his Italian cousin. The smart one that drinks red wine and loves people. Okay, shit, no, it's me. All right, yeah. I did it. And so I gave him an interview saying. So that's the circle. The Koch brothers, Exxon, the Wall Street firms are the only people who profited from the work I did in the 70s and 80s. And I mean that literally. Because we unhooked bedrock America that had started the public schools, that had funded the common space, that believed in caring for your brother. It's not a coincidence that the name of most of our hospitals has saints' names on them or church names on them. And we turned it into a political party called the Republican Party that has literally tried to eviscerate the sense of community. To use the analogy, they walk into my church, as it were, they smash down the candle stand, and they say, go home and worship alone. Do not come into this space where you see other people and responsible for them. That's socialism. In fact, just go online and buy corporate worship from this and this community here in a deregulated economy. Okay, that's not happening. But that's as dramatic as what has happened. Since when can't the government regulate banks? Since when can Walmart give corporate contributions but their employees can't sue? And so the thing that boggles my mind is I walk Lucy down the road every day thinking of the world she inherits that we did a little bit to help craft, is that she's walking into a world where it is no longer Christian to be compassionate and responsible. Yeah. And that's just shocking to me.
Me too.
So my mother did not invite pregnant 15-year-olds to live in our house for a year and a half or 2 years or 3 years and help raise their babies. She did not do that. She did not do that to get for them to vote Republican, for them to be correct in their ideas. Rather, she just treated them correctly. There's a big difference. And so, you know, why I wrote this book and kind of just finally said, okay, I'll stop ducking and just saying, oh, I write novels and about military-civilian relations, and no, I'm not that Frank Schaeffer. I haven't quite done that, but just about. Sin of omission, you know, does count. When people ask me who you are, I bit the bullet and I wrote the book and said, okay, I'm going to tell the truth. Here's the name of the doctor that was murdered because somebody had read our book, and the guy had written a letter to Dad saying, I'm following what you're doing. Here's what we said. Here are the people we were in bed with, and this is where it led. And the reason I did that, and I'm not being facetious, I am being honest, is that I earn my money as a writer. Not a scam artist, unless you think all writing is scamming, but I do earn my living as a writer, so I choose topics that I think are interesting. But having said that, the reason I chose to write this book in particular is because literally I do have a tremendous burden and a sense of guilt and a sense of wanting to apologize for the bit I did, but also the fact that people like my mother, and my dad in particular, but my mom in this book, will be remembered more for her theology. Oh yeah, they were part of the religious right, and the compassion, which was really her ministry, would get forgotten. So I'll end just by reading a tiny bit from the back, and we'll have a couple of minutes for questions, which I'll do. And I'm not going anywhere, so if you... This comes toward the end of the book. There's a way to live comforted by faith without being part of the evil that constitutes so much of religion. This way of faith is symbolized for me by a certain Greek Orthodox service Jeannie and I love. And remember, I wasn't talking about joining the Orthodox Church as the way to do it. I'm just talking about my little neck of the woods. The service of forgiveness. And no, this is not a pitch for my religion, just a sharing with you of what Jeannie and I happen to do in our little community, where we encounter a church tradition that, like all other church traditions, is far from perfect. Not the way, but a way that we happen to love. After prayers are read, this service ends with each person in our local Greek Orthodox community walking to the front of our sanctuary, kissing the icon of Jesus, then bowing in front of our priest. Forgive me, we say. I forgive you, answers our priest, as does each member of the congregation. We embrace, and then together we say, God forgives us both. After that exchange, each person takes his or her place next to the priest in a line that, after we've all stepped up and taken our places, stretches around the interior perimeter of the church. Each of us repeats the action and then moves down the line, repeating the forgive me ritual with everyone in the congregation until we've all asked each other for forgiveness. We bow before children and old people, middle-aged parishioners, and giggling children. We ask forgiveness from people we love and from people we don't like. Everyone from the priest to the youngest infant in her mother's arms is an equal in this ritual. When I get to the place in line where Jeannie is standing, there's a fraught history in my forgiveness. We hug just as we've hugged everyone else, but in Jeannie's embrace is the healing gift of reconciliation. My wife of 40 years says, I forgive you, with such warmth and sincerity that I feel that life is not a step to a better place, but is that better place now.
Amen.
If you have any questions, we'll take them. Yes, sir.
I'm wondering about the theology is book.
Right. I knew that would get somebody. I'm wondering about the
No problem at all with that. But your mom had a source for her praxis, her anthropology. Where's that source from?
Yeah, here, that's a great question. Did you hear it? Where's the source of the theology fund? And it's a real question that I wrestle with and don't have the answer for. But I'll tell you just where I'm at this morning. For me, there's no clear divide between the evidence of our eyes and our hearts and what's in books and what's in experience and the learning curve. It's all the reality we confront. And so when I say that theology is bunk, or there's parts of the Bible that I don't disagree with, I utterly reject, and someone comes back to me and says what my mother would have said, which is then how do you know anything and what do you base your faith on? I say I base it on the same thing that I base everything else in life on, and that is a step-by-step incremental learning process with many haltings and failings, but where I'm never asked to stop thinking, and where I'm not living by the book. There's a religion, by the way, that does that very well, and it's called Islam. And that has nothing to do with being anti-Islamic, but Islam is all about the book. Christianity used to be about a living relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. And so the irony is that you have an evangelical community that talks about a direct relationship with God. Oh, the Lord told me to do this and that and the other. But that every single one of those intuitions, if you want to put it that way, has to be justified by something in this book. And someone would say, yeah, but in verse 2 Peter this says that, so how can you say this? Well, that book says a lot of stuff. And this is what I think. And there's nothing wrong with that debate and that discussion. One, by the way, that's fairly alive in the tradition of certain parts of Judaism that have done this very much, where they see the Bible as a base for argumentation, not like here it is, tough if you don't like them. So I think that the basis comes from the actual humanity that is divine, not only within us, but that when we say we are created, unless we're idiots and we're talking about opposing evolution or something, but we talk about this miracle where Lucy is stardust and I'm stardust, and Stardust is looking into Stardust saying, I love you, from an inert, organic base, life form. Unless we're blind to those realities, we don't need a book to live by. We need reality to live by, and we need what has been revealed not only in our hearts, but in the history of Christianity. And I'll give you one brief example. There are pro-slavery verses in the Bible, and there's no way to weasel around them. There are anti-slavery verses in the Bible. Just do unto others would be one of them that comes to mind. And there's no way to reason around it. These contradict each other. The movement for the emancipation and the freedom of the slaves came out of people who decided to pick these verses over these verses. Theology is bunk when it tries to reconcile them. You got to choose. And so the Bible tells you to do terrible things, to treat people horribly. Women, it tells you to treat children horribly. They will not die when you beat them. Just beat them enough to get that original sin running, and so forth and so on. It tells you wonderful things. And I'll tell you what I base my life on. I choose to follow what I know is right or hope is right. And so it's not a question of knowing. It's not a question of theology or correctness of belief. It's the belief that my life has meaning, that I'm meant to learn something, that it's incremental, that I can be a better grandfather than a father. And so maybe at age 59, I can be a better spiritual person than the idiot I was at 17 or 18. And so the process of the actual connection with God is one I believe we can trust. And it doesn't rest on the book, it rests on reality. Look, this is a book. This is reality. The description is never the reality, it's a metaphor for it. These are just words. The reality is something totally different. So no book, whether you believe it's divinely inspired or not, can be reality. And lastly, I would just say, in that sense, there are no evangelical fundamentalist Protestants. None. Because not one of them actually tries to reconcile everything you live by. It's impossible. They all pick and choose. So you don't have people wandering around making themselves Christ's eunuchs for the kingdom of God. They don't do it. And that's in the New Testament. And, a lot of places are enlightened enough to tell women, don't sit down and shut up. Maybe you have something to say. And so they're going against their book. They just don't come out and say it the way I do, because they're still trying to sell into the Christian Booksellers Association market. And that's closer to the truth than you want to know, in terms of where people believe and what they dare to say. There's a lot more people there who would agree with big chunks of what I said. Oh, I couldn't say that. I'd never be invited back to fill in the blank of where you got your last honorarium. So that's the deal. One more quick question and we're done. There was somebody over there. We're done.